Since 1977, our guest today has been in Nashville playing bass, both live and in the studio, with a whole list of who's who in country and rock music, including Don Williams, Trisha Yearwood, Emmylou Harris, Toby Keith, Neil Diamond, Billy Ray Cyrus, George Jones, Billy Joe Shaver, Alan Jackson, Earl and Randy Scruggs, Dwayne Eddy, Asleep at the Wheel, Kathy Mattea, Keith Whitley, Alison Krauss, Steve Winwood, Willie Nelson, Garth Brooks, John Hyatt, Ricky Skaggs, Adrian Belew, Peter Frampton, Leanne Womack, Patty Loveless, and many more, if that wasn't enough. He has been president of the Nashville-based Local 257 of the American Federation of Musicians since 2008, succeeding longtime president Harold Bradley in June of 2010. He was elected to the International Executive Board of the AFM for a 3-year term and reelected again and again and again, and he's still there. He was one of the AFM leaders in the forefront effort to reform airline carry-on laws, which have been reformed thanks to him and the AFM's efforts. In addition to AFM responsibilities, Dave Pomeroy continues to record, write, and perform in a variety of musical settings, including his annual benefit concert for Room at the Inn, a homeless organization. Please welcome Mr. Dave Pomeroy.
Hey, glad to be here. Thanks.
Glad to have you. How you doing today?
Doing okay.
Good.
You know, nice to see a little sunshine out there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a nice break from our winter freeze we had a couple weeks ago.
Very, very, very odd times we're in, that's for sure.
So, you know, not a lot of people that watch our podcast may know really anything about the union. So what is the purpose of the union, and what does it do for the average musician or the touring musician? Is it for everybody?
Well, it's a great question. You know, a lot of it's kind of like a lot of things in life. You get out of something what you put into it.
Right.
And for me, I definitely, you know, I had never heard of the union before I moved to Nashville. And at some point early on, somebody who I respected said, "Hey kid, you need to join the union." It's like, okay, what's that? Where's the what? Who? And so I went and joined, and you know, again, not really understanding what I was getting into, but what I've learned over the years is that the AFM is the only organization looking out for musicians as a group. It was founded in 1896. The Nashville chapter was founded in 1902.
Wow.
So we're coming up on 120 years. And things, you know, Nashville was always known as kind of a center of art and culture with the Fisk Jubilee Singers back in the 1800s.
Right.
You know, to the beginnings of the Grand Ole Opry and all the educational institutions. But the big bang of the music business in Nashville, from my perspective, is in the 40s and 50s when Decca and RCA saw that hillbilly music was really happening, which was mainly discovered in East Tennessee and Bristol by Ralph Peer, recording the Carter Family and those other folks. But as it had evolved and the Grand Ole Opry came along in the 20s and 30s, by the 40s and 50s, there was money to be made, and the labels knew that. So when they came, they hired musicians to run their record labels. Not sure why, but I'm glad they did. And Decca hired Owen Bradley, who was a great keyboard player, arranger, and big band leader who was playing every weekend at the Bellmead Country Club, and was like, sure, I can run a record label. And then Chet Atkins was hired by RCA.
Right.
And they basically said to these major companies out of New York, if you're going to come here and work with our folks, we're going to do it right. We're union members, they're our friends and our peers, and we're going to do everything on union contracts. And the labels, wanting to make money, said, okay. And that really started the tradition of recording in Nashville, a right-to-work state, or as we call it, right to work for less.
Yes.
To record and create this body of work that became a magnet for not only musicians but songwriters and artists. There's no other place in the world since Tin Pan Alley in like 1920s in New York where songwriters can come make a living.
Still.
So and musicians, it's like these are parallel food groups. And from my very beginning time in Nashville, I didn't really understand what songwriting was. I just knew what the Beatles were and wanted to be in a band like the Beatles. I really didn't understand any other part of it. And so as I began to learn that there are all these other jobs, like being a sideman. And so suddenly I'm a sideman for songwriters. And it's like it's a whole other world. And I was coming from a musically very complex bass solo kind of place and into prog rock and jazz and all kinds of stuff. And suddenly I'm playing with these songwriters like Guy Clark and Billy Joe Shaver, who only use very few chord changes, very few rhythmic variations, but tell these unbelievable stories.
Right.
And so it was a real wake-up call for me as a musician to learn how to play behind somebody. And then after I'd been with them for close to a year, I got the opportunity to work with Don Williams.
Right.
And that was the best possible thing that could have happened to me at that time in my life. And I ended up being with Don for 14 years full-time. Nice. And then off and on for 34. And through Don, I learned about all these things, including the union. Right. I'd only been with Don a few months, and we did a show in Giant Stadium in Meadowlands. And I'm like, man, I've made it. This is great. I can retire now. I've played a big stadium, and all these people were applauding for me. Well, for the guy that I was working for, but maybe a little bit for me. And so then about a month later, I'm sitting home. I get paid to do the gigs. Great. Come back home. About a month later, I get a call. Hey, man, turn on Channel 4. You're on TV. It's like, what? And I turn on the TV, and Casey Kasem's American Top 40. Right. Don Williams had the #1 country single that week, and unbeknownst to me, they had filmed the Giant Stadium show. So it was a clip of one song from the Giant Stadium show, and I got paid like twice as much as I got paid to do the gig, and I got paid really good to do the gig. And then it aired again a month later, and I got the same amount of money again. And I'm like, so for me, it was like, wow, the union. Thank you. Yeah. And it was before people called it intellectual property. Right. But that's what it is, and that's what we protect. So that was to me, was my understanding of what the union did. And then as I slowly, very slowly got into demos and started to play in the studio, and then finally Don called me to work on his record. And I'm signing a union contract. I'm getting a master session, and it was so incredibly exciting. And Don was he was so encouraging in the most laid back way possible. And he gave me the best piece of musical advice I ever had when I was still trying to calm down enough to not play too much. Right. And he said, he pulled me aside one night. He just said, David, you don't have to play what's on the record. Just don't throw me off. And I thought, man, and I followed that advice the rest of my career.
That's great advice.
And really, and the whole thing of playing the song, and that's what Nashville is really known for, is, we've got this incredible community of musicians who can go do their own thing and improvise and play jazz and do all these other stuff, but they can also show up in the studio and within 3 hours cut as many as 6 or 7 songs that sound like they each spent a day on each of them because of the skill set and the way that people have learned how to work together, the Nashville number system. But in the end, what the union does for all these folks is we make sure they're protected. So when Mazda wants to use Patsy Cline's Back in Baby's Arms for a 2-year run of commercials, a 90-year-old violin player comes in to pick up a check for that record he played on September 1962. Got paid $58 back then. He got picked up a check for $2,000. Nice. And he was a very happy 90-year-old man.
I bet.
and so those kind of things, it's like the lasting value. But what I've tried to do with the union is to take it to a broader place because, there's a lot of things that don't fit neatly into, like our union agreements for recording and television are very clear and very good, and also for commercials and jingles. But when you get in, the streaming world is the wild, wild west, and we've been trying to, keep up with that. But for those kinds of work, the union is the only way to ensure that your work is protected. Because otherwise somebody's like, here's $100, thanks. And then the next thing you know, you go to the movie theater and there's that song you played on and you got $100. And it's like, wait a second. And so Nashville has been able to convince employers that the right thing to do is to do it on a union card. Like, I'm really excited that over the last few years, we have Dan Auerbach doing all of his stuff on contracts. We have Jack White back on board doing his stuff on contracts, and Dave Stewart from the Rhythmics has been here, and he just filed a ton of stuff, all because the players go, excuse me, we can do this union, right? It's okay, because we've established this kind of friendly union vibe where it isn't like, hey, man, blah, 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 blah. None of that stuff. It's no finger pointing, no fist shaking. It's all, hey, come on, let's work together. Right. And as a bass player, I've spent a lot of my life caught between somebody who's rushing and somebody who's dragging. And it's sort of like negotiations are pretty much the same thing. It's like, right, you're over here and you're over here, and let's see if we can find the middle. So, the description of what we do goes a lot further than it used to. We spent a lot of time down on Lower Broadway over the last decade working with the city, getting musician loading signs put up. Then they come down because they want to expand the sidewalks, and we work with them and try to keep the taxis from messing with the musicians. Of course, now that's once again the wild, wild west.
Right.
And all the progress that we made, we're going to have to go back and try to recreate. But
right.
We were, and we've came up with some affordable parking options. We have, because of strength in numbers, we have ways to save people money.
Right.
You could save AT&T $100 a year on AT&T. That's like, more than a third of your union dues.
Right.
So to me, it's a value equation. The other thing that we have that, of course, lately has not been a factor, but we have a fully equipped rehearsal hall with a drum set, grand piano, backline, PA, and that is definitely one of the more popular things that we offer, because you could spend the amount of your union dues in one day down at SIR.
Yeah, for sure.
And we love SIR, and when you got a budget, it's awesome.
Yep.
But for people to be able to come do things there, we do networking events like the Songwriter Musician Jam. So it's a little bit of everything. Where the union is not as strong is in the live engagement world. Mm-hmm. And certain types, like, say, for example, when the Lion King is on the road from Broadway and they're doing a tour and they go to TPAC and sit down for a week or two, we get those kind of things on contracts. But as far as club work goes, again, it's a supply and demand thing.
Right.
And the club owners have all the ammo.
Right.
And so, it does. And as we've learned, if you build up an audience, you can go play a club that's not giving you a guarantee and walk away with a really good payday.
Yep.
But only if you've done the front end work, and that's on you, because
right.
the club is not, other than putting an ad in the paper, maybe, the clubs don't really have to do a lot, because
right.
it's really up to the acts to bring those people in. For touring folks, it's we have some standards. They're very low minimums that are a lot higher than they used to be. But just to say, you got to at least pay somebody this much to take them out of town.
Right.
But where it comes into play is when they go do something else and there's a problem.
Right.
Whether it's Saturday Night Live or the Stagecoach Festival in LA, or something where there's a problem, then I have to jump in sometimes.
Right.
And I do jump in on things that are not necessarily officially part of my job, but just because I know they're the right thing to do, right. I'm going to do it.
Right. What are some of the common misconceptions of the union?
Well, certainly in a right-to-work state, it's that every job has to be a union job. We would love for every job to be a union job, but that is not a requirement.
Right.
It's also not illegal in a right-to-work state to work with non-members.
Right.
In a non-right-to-work state, you could be brought up for a violation of working with non-members. Again, my whole approach to it has been much less, you got to do what we've always done or we're going to bring you up in front of the board. It's like, right. That's just, we don't do that.
Yeah.
We talk to them and we work it out.
Yeah, strong arm tactics don't always work.
No, I just, to me, it's not as effective in the long run either, because it's really about educating and informing people. So I would say also that people, understand, as we were talking about with the live stuff, that, live gigs are most likely not going to have a union component, but if they do, we'll work with you and, sort things out. We've been actually, one of the things that we have changed is that we do actually now have a booking agency and a referral agency, and we do actually get musicians work. We were doing a really cool thing a couple times a month with the Adventure Science Center, the planetarium place, and we're having musicians come over for an hour, kind of like a petting zoo, where like a steel player will set up in the lobby of the Adventure Science Center, and all the kids coming in are looking at it like it's an exhibit. And they're, what's that? Oh, man. We've had all different people go down there with a lot of different instruments, and it's great because, you're interacting with the public, and
right.
It pays $150 for a 1 hour gig.
No, that's not
so,
too bad.
we are in the perception that we don't get anybody work is no longer true.
Yeah.
And we do try to equitably distribute it. and not play favorites,
Right,
you know,
right.
as much as possible. We also, part of our job is to get the right person to that right job. You know, if they want a classical guitar player, you don't send them a flat picker,
Right.
you know, and that aspect of just helping musicians reach out to each other. You know, our website is, you know, we have these member profiles where people can build a profile basically advertising their services, even saying, I will go on the road, I don't want to play weddings. You know, it kind of gives you a checklist you can do. And I think too, it's just that it's some kind of elite club that it's really not. You know, we try very hard to be accessible and helpful, and it doesn't, you know, it's more than just making sure that people get paid and making sure that the union gets our fair share. We have, because of Right to Work, we have many people who will take advantage of us
Right.
and use our services and not pay for them. And we really can't do anything about that legally. So it's just a question of, you know, karma.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's not cool that you're doing that.
No.
And maybe someday it will come back to you and you'll wish you'd done it. But who knows? But it ain't going to be because
it usually does.
it ain't going to be because I followed you around and gave you a hard time.
So with the pandemic and all, with no tours going on in last year or probably well into this year, musicians have to bridge the way with live streams. What is the union doing to measure the value of media?
Yeah, that's a good question, because obviously it's a whole new playing field. We've had rates for streaming things, you know, because it's what we call a promulgated agreement, which we also have with cable TV, because it's impossible to negotiate with all of cable TV or even
Right.
anybody who represents anybody else, because they don't. And it's a similar situation with streaming, to where sometimes it's for the label and sometimes the label will pay it if there's a label involved, but there's also a lot of independent artists doing things. So we've come up with what we think are some fairly reasonable rates for this. And we also have something called the Music Performance Trust Fund. It's been around since the 1940s, and traditionally it was funded with record sales. And a certain portion of record sales, the labels would give to the fund. And the idea way back when was that records are putting live music out of business, which of course we all know didn't happen.
Right.
But that was the idea. So as a way of creating a fund for musicians to get a paying gig. And so the traditional way has been that you find a co-sponsor, and the Music Performance Trust Fund will pay half, and you know, and the sponsor will pay the other half. But since the pandemic, and since in the last several phono negotiations, we renegotiated, because the physical sales mean nothing in terms of funding that. So we now have a piece of several of the streaming revenues. One is foreign streaming, with a small percentage goes to the fund. So the fund is actually really well funded now,
Nice.
better than it has been in years.
Yeah.
And so for the moment, while the pandemic is on, there's actually a program where the fund pays 100% of the streaming engagement fee. So and you still have to have a sponsor, but all the sponsor has to do is agree to, and it depends on the situation. In some cases, the sponsor pays everybody at the time of the performance, and then they get reimbursed. But now, you know, but usually they'd get reimbursed 50%. Now it's 100%. And so I think the scale for a 1 hour stream is like $110, double for leader. I believe there is an H&W component of $22, so that would actually make it $132 for a 1 hour stream. The caveat on the trust fund ones that are fully funded is that it's a one-time only stream, and it can't be archived. If it's archived, then there's an additional payment due.
Right,
if you want to do it for a month, it's $85 an hour for the players. And then, you know, in some cases, an artist might want to do that. But for the trust fund to pay, the idea is that it's a one-time live stream and it's not being archived.
Right.
And so, you know, which for some people is a deal breaker if they're trying to build content. But for people who need money and don't have any, it's a gig.
Right. Right. For sure.
Yeah. So, but you know, obviously the touring folks, especially the big tours, and anybody who kind of did what I had to do for a few years, and you kind of put all your, you know, everything in one basket. When you have a gig with an artist that's working a lot, you don't have a lot of opportunities to pursue other things, you know, and so for a lot of those folks that just suddenly, hey, the bus is stopping, get off the bus, They you know, because I knew from my 14 years on the road, every time you get on that bus and leave town, Nashville is still moving.
Right.
And you know, you're coming back into wherever the wheel turned since you left.
Right. You almost disappear when you go on the road.
You really do. Yeah. And there's an art to that, because towards the end I would say things like, "Oh man, I'm really sorry, I'm booked that day." You know, not "I'm going to be in Peoria," you know. And they'll be like, "How about the next day?" "Man, I'm sorry, I'm booked that whole week." But I just, you know, I wasn't lying. It was just saying, "Hey, yeah, I'm on the road," you know.
Yep.
And they hang up the phone. So, you know, we're trying to, you know, help people figure out the streaming stuff, and we've done some fundraising things, and you know, it's obviously working as a new way for people to get things out, but it's also still, you know, how do you monetize that? It's really, you know, the Venmo type tip jar thing is really been one of the better ways that people have come up with. But, you know, I mean, I find it really interesting to see how different people are approaching it. I noticed recently that Todd Rundgren is doing a tour, and it's like and I've had some other people do this too. Tom Paxton was doing this as well, where they're doing a show, they're booking it like a tour, and doing a new show every night, or every, you know, 4 or 5 nights a week, and only sending it to certain areas. But the thing about it is, we were talking about this last night, there's no capacity on the internet. So it's like, you know, if you can you might not be able to get 200,000 people in the club that you want to play, but if you work hard enough, you might be able to get 200,000 people to watch your thing. Sure. You know, and I've had a couple of videos from my YouTube channel go viral and have like hundreds of thousands of views. And it's you just never know these days. And so I think we're trying as best we can to keep up with it, but it's definitely changing all the time. And we welcome the input from anybody who wants to, you know, come with us with an idea. There are no dumb ideas these days, especially.
Right, for sure. So why do you think, like, I've seen a lot, I mean, fortunately, like here at Forks, we've been employed through the whole pandemic, thanks to our boss, our owner. But a lot of musicians have not. A lot of musicians have been struggling. Why do you think it's been so difficult for musicians to get assistance from local or federal sources?
You know, I think sometimes it's a pride thing. I think we've discovered that people have a hard time asking for help.
Yeah.
You know, some of it is that. Some of it is not knowing where to turn. And so, you know, when we've had situations come up, like we worked with a group called Hope 20 last year. In fact, we're still working with them, where they applied for a grant as a nonprofit and have been paying bills for musicians who can't pay their bills.
Right.
And so they approached us. One of our members was part of this partnership, and they approached us and they set aside $250,000 of the $1.2 million they got just for us and our members. And what we did, because the Nashville Symphony has, of course, gone through this terrible period where they've been furloughed. They were furloughed from July till the end of the year. Now they're on this stipend of $500 a week, which is a pittance compared to what they were making. And you know, so with all these situations, you know, Hope 20 was willing to set aside. So we took $125,000 and set it aside just for symphony members and sent them a separate message with a separate link, and then $125,000 for the other members, and just say, hey, you need some help. Don't be afraid to ask. This is confidential. These people will help you. Sometimes too, you know, I think there's a feeling of, I've put all my eggs in this basket and I don't know where to go. You know, when I talk to young musicians who come to town, you know, and they come to meet and they want to talk about different things, I tell people all the time, you know, if you have a way, if you know of a way that you can make a living that doesn't kill your soul or wear your body out, you can make a different set of choices about the music that you want to pursue if you're not going hand to mouth from one tiny gig to another tiny gig. So that you can plan ahead, which is not always musicians' greatest strength, but, you know, we're all different. Right. You know, we're all different, and I mean, every type of personality type is in there in the musician world, and some people are very secure, some people are very insecure. But I think it's important for people to understand that even though you're not making a living, music still has value, and it still has meaning, and whatever we can do to help each other to get back to that point where we can get out and do these things that we want and need and love to do, that's what we're going to do. So, you know, we're trying to be more of a conduit of information rather than always the union this, the union that.
Right.
I think it's important.
So within the union, there are several programs, like, for instance, Music Cares, the Sound Health, all of those, which offer benefits, in assistance to musicians.
Exactly. Well, we have, within the union, we have our emergency relief fund,
right,
which once you've been a member for a year, you can apply for that if you've had a medical problem that keeps you from working. You can apply for a gift, not a loan, of up to $2,500, and you can apply once a year. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, over the years, I think we've given out about $400,000 on that to people. And, you know, every situation is different. We have and it's all totally confidential to where nobody knows what's going on except these people on the committee who are sworn to secrecy.
Right.
So after the flood, we created a 501c3, which is different than the Emergency Relief Fund, which is a 501c6, which means that it's for union members only.
Okay.
So a 501c3 is not only tax deductible, it's tax deductible because it's not just for union members, it's union members and non-members.
Oh, okay.
So we created that after the flood. We called it the Nashville Musicians Association Flood Relief Fund, and we raised about $130,000 and got $40,000 worth of instruments that we gave away, and gave away all the money. And so it just been sitting there. So after the pandemic hit, we thought, well, we should reinvent that fund. So we renamed it the Nashville Musicians Association Crisis Assistance Fund. So we will no longer have to change the name every time something new happens. So if we get an earthquake, we'll be okay. And so we're still in the fundraising portion of that. We're at about 25 grand. So we've got a ways to go, but that will be open when we'd like to get 100 grand. When we get to 50, we may stop and say, okay, and kind of treat it like a stimulus check thing where everybody gets, if 1,000 people apply, they get $500 a piece.
Right.
And go from there. But we're doing that. Music Cares is actually part of the Grammy organization, NARIS, but we have a great relationship with them, and I send people to them with discretion because they are really well funded compared to us. Because the Grammy Foundation is pouring money, and we actually, right after the pandemic hit, we worked with them because they were so inundated with applications. We volunteered to help look over the applications and make sure that they were at least complete, and get back to and say, hey, you didn't include this and that. Right. You need to save them time and money, and we did that for a little while. So it's sort of like whatever comes up, we're going to try to help if we can. The other, and like, for example, the Opry, if anyone's ever played the Opry even once, they could be eligible for a grant from the Opry Trust Fund if they're having a problem. And again, I try to only send people there who I know it's really legit and I know that they're running out of options. Right. And so, we're trying to do those things. And of course, Sound Healthcare is our own, we created our own exclusive Blue Cross Blue Shield health plan, which I think, we've had a lot of people join the union because of that, who aren't necessarily professional musicians, but they're what we call industry professionals. Right. People, a lot of them are, sort of 55 to 65 and in that weird little gray area where they're too young for Medicare, and the Affordable Care Act is maybe not good enough coverage-wise. So we have 3 plans, and our group, Sound Healthcare, they also will consult with our members and guide them to the right plan, even if it's the Affordable Care Act is what they need to do. And so that's been something we feel really good about. Yeah. And because to me, I've already been very blessed. I'm trying to pay it back.
Yeah, yeah. And in fact, that was I've been a member of the union now for almost 10 years, I think. And that was one of the reasons why I joined, because I knew that there were health benefits, not really a group benefit, but kind of a group benefit. Well,
that's how it started, because when I was president of RMA Nashville, which is the recording musicians division of the union, before I was a local officer on the executive board, but when I was president of RMA, I was on the board, and R.J. Stillwell, who's the guy that founded Sound Healthcare, he came in and made a presentation that I thought was incredible. Well, this was before that. He gave his presentation, but the president at the time just didn't really get it. He already had health care and he wasn't thinking about it.
Right.
So I waited an appropriate amount of time and I approached him and said, hey, sorry the union didn't pick up on it, but I've got 200 members of the RMA. Could we work with you and be a group? And so we started working with him then. And then when I became president, about 2 years later, one of my first calls was to RJ and say, man, okay, now I got 2,500 members.
Yeah.
And so he's been a real boon to folks who needed some help, because that's a crazy world out there.
Yeah, sure is. So do you think that the pandemic can open up new opportunities to push for changes that would make touring more equitable and safer by negotiating contracts that cover things like standardized pay for local support, safer spaces, security, et cetera, things like that?
That's an interesting way of putting it, but absolutely. I mean, I think that this has forced everybody to think out of the box, and I know there's a lot of information out there about the safe reopening of venues. And, like, for example, HCA is working with the Nashville Symphony to work on the Skirmerhorn and look at everything, including the, circulation and all that stuff. So, yeah, I think it's going to be an opportunity. It's certainly an opportunity to kind of reinvent. I think the fear that I would have about that wonderful thought that you have is that people who are so desperate to work that they won't ask enough questions or maybe be careful enough and either put themselves at risk or take work that is really disrespectful in how it pays and what it means. And that's always, I mean, that's the yin yang that we deal with every single day with the union. It's like, you can do whatever you want, but that doesn't mean that it's right. And it might even be legal to fill up Ocean Way with 70 string musicians and then pay them the equivalent of what an independent artist would pay somebody who played on their record that's going to sell 1,000 copies. And then that's the soundtrack to Call of Duty or NFL Madden, know, and like, it's legal, but it ain't right. It's not right. Yeah. And all I can really do is just point that out and try to do it in a friendly way and say, hey, if you ever want to not do that, I'd be happy to help you.
Yeah. I know that's been ongoing for a while now.
Yeah. It's one of those things that every now and then at 2:00 in the morning I wake up and go, man, if they would just do the right thing, I could sleep. So, do you have a prediction? And we're not holding you to this, of course, but do you have a prediction as to when live music will return the way that we would like it to? Wow. I'm not sure that's a question that has an answer, but I think that it's safe to say that we all want it. I think the hardest thing is going to be for everybody, now that we're starting to come out of it, for everybody to not throw the masks away and think that we're already there, because we're not. Right. And, this may be airing a few weeks or months from now and will maybe be further down the road. But I think it's really tricky. I would say that it's going to have to start small and build up. And vaccination, the vaccination speed is a huge factor. I almost hate to put a time on it as much as just say that I would think by the fall, we should be looking at some sort of reasonably safe return to where, maybe we're at a third capacity or a half. I kind of, my semi-educated guess would be that it could be the first of the year before it really feels like it used to feel, if it's ever going to feel that way again. It's going to be very different, and
personally, I feel it's going to be weird for a while.
Well, it is, and everything changes your perspective, I mean, I haven't talked about this very much, but I got COVID and survived, stayed home and got through it. But, when I walk into a place and I feel, I look at it differently because, because I mean, I tried really, really hard to be careful and got it anyway. And it just sort of, once you realize how easy that is, it's you just kind of, I look at things a little differently, and I hope that eventually we're all going to be able to drop our guard a little bit and get back to those things. that we love. You know, I mean, elbow bumps are fine, but I like hugging people. I got no problem with that. But, you know, and you know, theoretically, I can't get it because I've had it, but like theoretically ain't necessarily.
Right. So Dave, what do you look for in a drummer?
Well, that's a great question. Here at Forks Drum Closet, I should be very careful with what I say. You know, I think the pocket is always important, but there's also dynamics, and I think for me, you know, because of what I described earlier, where I suddenly went from the land of let's have another bass solo to like playing so few notes compared to what I'd ever done before. You know, that it was really about, you got to get, if now when you're doing instrumental music, it's a whole other thing. But when there's a singer and it's a song oriented thing, which a lot of the stuff I've done has ended up being that way. You know, it's like the drummer and the bass player have got to get underneath that and it's a volume thing, but it's more, you know, like a drummer who can play a great groove at a low volume with the whole kit balanced to where you can stick a ribbon stereo mic out in front of that kit and get it all. And you can put a kick and a snare on there, but you really don't have to. So I think that's something that I appreciate in a drummer, especially like if you're having people over to your home studio,
right?
You know, and you know, I came through the era where every drummer, it seemed like every drummer's job was to hit the damn drums as hard as possible every time. And luckily, most of the time we were not in the same room, but a lot of times I was in the same room with a drummer who had been directed to hit the drums as hard as he could, and it would be like, you know, it'd be like 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'd be playing the whole song without really hearing myself because the drums are just like everywhere. But I think it's really, it's like friendships, you know. It's just about being able to listen, to react. You know, I can remember one drummer who, you know, was a little further along in the ladder than me. You know, I was like, hey man, can we try this little thing? And he's looking at me and said, you do that. It's like, okay, fair enough. And you can just go boom, boom, boom for the entire song, and I'll change up and make it not sound like you're doing that. That's fine. And you know, and yet other people are like, oh man, you know, like when I first worked with Kenny Malone, you know, one of the sweetest, most wonderful guys who I was totally in awe of. You know, and we're playing in the studio with Don Williams. I'm like beside myself. I'm just trying not to freak out, man. I'm in the studio with Kenny Malone. Oh my God. Because I played with stuff with Don before, but never with the band, with the studio band. And ironically, the guy who had played on all the records up to then, Joe Allen, was on the road with Neil Young at the time. Yeah. And so I got to get in there, but you know, I'm like, yo, Kenny, man, it's nice to play with you. And he's like, and he comes up and he goes, man, I really dig the end of your notes. And I'm like, what? And because I'm just thinking downbeat. This is 2/4 downbeat, downbeat, downbeat. And I was muting my note right as he was hitting the snare drum in that halftime feel. And I'd never thought, and it was totally unconscious. I'd never thought about it.
You created space.
I was just doing it, and I had to figure out what he was talking about. And then a week later, we started a band. Yeah. And in fact, Sam Bacco, who was wandering around here somewhere earlier, Sam poked his head in. Yeah, I met Sam through Kenny, and we started a band called Tone Patrol.
Oh, nice.
We did for like 10 years. It was just an absolute blast. We even got an award for Jazz Band of the Year. Nice. But you know, it's like one of those things where Kenny is one of the quirkiest drummers ever, but it's all about the song. Yeah. It's all about the song. And like I say, you know, that does, I mean, if the song says go crazy,
then go crazy.
Go crazy. Yeah. It doesn't mean that it all has to be contained and perfect and polite. Right. But to me, I've done a lot of work without drummers in the kind of acoustic bluegrass world, but you know, I love playing. I love playing with a drummer where it's just listening to each other. That's the main thing, is a drummer who's listening rather than I'm laying this down, here's where it is, y'all get with me. Right. I mean, that can work, and in certain styles, it almost has to be that way. But in the world where things are a little more fluid, it can be, it's just so great when because the drums can be so musical and so appropriate, and you know, and it's just like a bass player. You play one wrong note and everybody's wrong. Right. You know, so we all have a lot of responsibility, and we should use it carefully. But drummers are fun because we can always, you know, we can joke a little bit. And it's just because it's like a friendship. It really is, even if it's just for 3 hours and you never see that drummer ever again.
Well, as the rhythm section, we're almost like brothers or siblings.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And, that's a good way of putting it.
You know, we certainly do our fair share of jabbing at our siblings from time to time,
Yes.
but we wouldn't be able to do our jobs
Family
without
stuff.
them.
Yes.
So, you know, there's several bass players in town that I would consider brothers, just because of how often we worked together, or you know, how we interacted together out on the road, or
and that's the hang factor is why it's called, you know,
Oh, yeah.
because there's a lot of great players and people want to hire somebody that they want to hang around with.
That's right.
And a lot of times people don't get that right away. And I've seen some wonderful players blow into town and be just too arrogant for their own good up front. And you got to ease your way into it, you know, and find that place where you're comfortable. And it's really great. I mean, one of the lessons that I learned was, you know, when I started playing with Don Williams and doing a few sessions here and there, the kind of people that I was working with really made it clear that everybody's ideas were welcome, that it was kind of an open floor. And if you had an idea, say something. And if it doesn't work, you don't take it personally. It doesn't mean you're a bad person or you're a bad musician just because you had an idea. And I had to learn that it doesn't always work that way.
Right.
Because I thought everybody was doing that. And then I got into a couple of situations where the producer had some very manipulative things, even tricks that he would do to kind of fool the artist, that I had to kind of have somebody go, no, he's kidding. Don't really do that.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, wow, that's weird.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine. But so you've got to be able to, and this maybe is a good place to leave it, is I think any musician, regardless of what you play, what instrument, the art is fitting into what your surroundings are, is fitting into whatever that is. And if that means it's like crazy beer drinking, honky tonk, fine, get that mindset. You know, if it means contemplative, barely playing, great. You know, do what's right for the whole thing, and don't get too hung up in your own stuff. Yep. Because, you know, we all got stuff and we all think our stuff is great, but it's like sometimes it's better than others. And so I think just being able to, and I was very lucky to have a couple of good friends kind of nicely bust me for not quite really being up on reading charts. And it's like, Dave, you're trying to memorize those things. Don't do that. Yeah. You're going to get caught. I know you're doing it, but they're going to know if you don't learn how to read those charts. It's like, oh, God, thought I was getting away with that. Thank you, Biff. and so, you know, and I'm grateful for those things. And those people, and people like that, like Kenny Malone, Biff Watson, Sam, you know, they're just, it's like, once you're in a band with somebody, you're kind of always in a band with them. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And so I just think, you know, just being able to get outside yourself and really think about what the whole thing needs and not just what you need. And that's when the great music happens. Yeah. Because as great as it is to be able to overdub stuff one at a time and stack it all up, there ain't nothing like getting 6 or 7 people in a room and doing it all at once. It's still my favorite way to record. I think it always will be. Yeah. I hope.
Dave, thank you for joining us. And
my pleasure.
It's been great talking to you. It's been a while since you and I have actually had a chance to talk.
Absolutely. So, well, thanks for asking me. And
absolutely.
You know, I think it's great that you guys are putting this information out there and just letting people know what's going on. Yeah. I mean, there's nowhere in the world like Nashville. No. And we got to do everything. Everybody who understands that needs to do everything we can do to keep it going. Yep. Because it is about respect. It's about mutual respect between employers and musicians, which doesn't happen hardly anywhere else on earth. And musicians in the music. Yeah, absolutely. And putting the music first. I agree. Yep. Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And best to everybody here at Forks. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks, Dave. You got it. Awesome. All right, folks. Yes, sir. We are open 9:30 to 6 Monday through Friday and 10 to 5 on Saturdays. Give us a call, 1-800-55-FORKS. Thanks again for joining us, and we will see you next time.